Uh-huh. I know. But yeah, we're a week past my due date now. This time last week, I was walking over to the Philadelphia Museum of Art to climb the rocky stairs to see if I could go into labor, which didn't work. And now we're here. Oh, so peaceful. Mm-hmm. If only babies knew how much attention they got for every little movement.
You're listening to me, Christy, and the sounds of our baby, Holland, who I am happy to report came into the world safely, if eventfully. Ted and I are now proud parents of 4. Our 2-year-old Win.
What's this?
That is a breast pump.
I don't like breast pumps.
Why not? Our 5-year-old twins, Fritz and Lark.
I feel like I'm gonna throw up.
Okay, do you want to get like a bucket?
Can I get a bucket?
Would you both feel like you're gonna throw up? What just happened?
And of course, our newest addition, Holland.
Do you have the hiccups?
They're loud.
Things have definitely been busy around here.
I know, I'm sorry. Just squirted her in the face. Okay.
And there is a lot of action at all times.
Wait, Win. No, thank you.
We want some money so we
Win,
can buy.
you can't put your feet on her. Win, you cannot put your feet on her.
Okay,
Sweetheart.
I want to make
Just gentle touches with your hands.
I want to just set the
Dada will be
table.
home later. Yes, Fritz wants to set the table. Ted is out buying the tile for our backsplash for our new
Mama,
kitchen.
can you please
So it's me and all 4
How do you do
kiddos.
start?
We are remodeling our new home, which is 100 plus years old. Of course, running Kalugo, keeping the kids entertained, all while getting to know the newest member of our family and facing the challenges that come with a newborn and postpartum life. It's so much, even the 3rd time around, since, of course, every baby is different and I'm different each time. Figuring out feeding, sleep, and so many diapers. Sorry if this embarrasses you later, Holland, but why so many blowouts? So many. So for this season of Today We Tried, I wanted to turn the mic on in my own home to capture my experiences going through the 4th trimester for the last time. I wanted to remember this time, which is always a blur, and to share what I've learned and what I'm still learning the 3rd time around. I'm documenting my journey through audio diaries, in-the-moment recordings, and conversations, including with my awesome producer, Zach.
How do you feel today?
I hope that by sharing my story, we can connect more intimately and spark real conversations around this difficult and singular time that can feel super isolating. I hope what I share helps you to feel less alone or more prepared or more sympathetic toward all of us parents who are in the thick of it and trying our best. The 4th trimester is truly a time to say, today we tried, and to know that that is more than enough. So, let's get started. Part 1, Holland's birth. So those of you who listened to season 1 of Today We Tried know that Win's birth was chaotic. I went into labor at home, thought I was being a wimp when the contractions felt so strong and so fast so quickly, and I ended up getting to the hospital 15 minutes before I had him in triage. It was a whole scene. So with Holland, I really wanted to get to the hospital in plenty of time for a relatively peaceful and epidural-filled birth. I had an epidural with the twins. It was magic. There wasn't time to get one with Win. Also, since I had had Win so quickly, everyone had been telling me their story of, they had a baby or their cousin or their best friend, had their baby at their house, in the car, in the elevator. I did not want to have one of those stories. I wanted to get to the hospital. And I had a few additional hopes. Here I am, pre-labor, full of nervous optimism.
Goals here: have a baby, have a vaginal delivery, get to do skin to skin right away, and delayed cord clamping.
I'm down for whatever.
Yeah.
You just, I'll
That's it.
ask for it.
I feel like Alka will be on board. That's our midwife. She seems lovely.
Let's just say things did not go according to that plan.
I ended up essentially delivering my own baby, even though I was in the hospital.
Yep, you heard that correctly, but it bears repeating because I still can't believe it.
I ended up
essentially delivering my own baby, even though I was in the hospital. So I've spoiled the ending, or part of it. There is another scarier twist to come. But let's start this birth story at the beginning. Here I am a few days after giving birth.
So I've been trying to think about Holland's birth. I've just been trying to process the time between Thursday evening when I went to the hospital because I had this feeling like she wasn't moving enough, and it would really hit me hard, and I was panicked. My thought was that I could just go in, get some monitoring, I would hear her heartbeat, and with the twins, I did these non-stress tests fairly regularly, and they would make sure that there was the right amount of movement, the right amount of accelerations of the baby's heart rate over a certain period of time, and then they would say, okay, you're good to go, and if it didn't look great, they would often do an ultrasound and just, confirm everything was okay. Went over to the hospital, and of course, even on the drive over there, I started to feel her moving around. And I was like, maybe I jumped the gun here, but I was on my way, and we'll just go to the hospital, get this checked out. And I went in and checked in with this receptionist, who I'm sure is lovely, had like zero urgency. She just slowly took a wipe out of her container of wipes, wiped down the dirty pens, moved them to the clean pen. I'm sitting there very much on edge, just kind of feeling like this was surreal. But no one else was worried, so I guess it helped me maybe feel a little less worried. I don't know. Then they take me over to get me on a monitor. As soon as I heard the heartbeat, I was like, okay, we have the heartbeat, hooked them on monitors. They did the monitoring, and the midwife on call there comes back. It's like, everything looks great. It's exactly how we want it to be. But it's your due date today, and if anyone comes in with a feeling of decreased fetal movement, really after 39 weeks, our recommendation is to induce. There's really a push now. A lot of places, you can just get induced when you're considered full term, and the midwife is like, everything looks great, but you just don't know if there's something that we're not catching, and that you may have had this first indication where we just recommend inducing.
It seems like there was a lot of waiting around, whatever, and then things escalated very quickly.
Here I am in conversation with our producer, Zach.
Did it feel like that?
Yeah, no, it really did. The decision to not go home, to stay until they had a bed for me to be induced, kind of my decision, and kind of, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy I did it, but it was 3 different doctors and a midwife being like, we want you to stay, but we're not going to force you to stay. It was a hard thing to process. I mean, they threw out the idea of the stillbirth, and I asked if there was a percentage that they could give me the likelihood of that happening. They're like, no, not really. We don't have that, but we recommend inducing. So that's what we decided to do. And they said, this was maybe around 1 a.m. and they thought they'd have a bed for me around 3 or 4. So Ted came over, and then it was like, oh no, obviously any woman who comes in and is in labor would be prioritized for a bed in labor and delivery. Get that. We were not an emergency situation, but also we were not supposed to go home. So very quickly it became clear we were just going to be hanging out. So we asked them to turn down the volume on the monitor. Ted had a chair he could kind of recline in, and we just tried to get some sleep.
They don't let you leave.
You cannot leave, you're trapped. But yeah, it's been a long time to get here. So we're excited, and it seems like I have a babe today.
Eventually they put kind of the needle in my arm so I'd be ready for an IV, but I wasn't hooked up to an IV. And they had actually taken me off of monitoring in the morning. They thought they were going to move my room, and then they didn't. And I was feeling good, and this very kind nurse was like, okay, just pull your sweatshirt sleeve down over so you can't see you have the IV thing in your arm, and you can go walk around the hospital. Technically, you're not supposed to leave, but just don't show anyone. And so I kind of walked around the hospital grounds, so I got some fresh air in the morning. It was just this weird suspended time, and I was trying to stay positive about it, that nothing bad was happening, I just kept repeating that to myself, that actually nothing bad was happening.
Because everything's okay with the baby, it wasn't stressful, it was just waiting, and we just kind of hung out in our little triage room.
Took a few calls, had some snacks, ate some meringues, had some coffee.
Yeah.
It was lovely.
Everything continued to look perfect.
but it was time to be induced. So we headed down to the labor and delivery floor.
Here we are in the labor and delivery room, not just delivery room.
We finally got in a labor and delivery room.
I've been told.
After
12 hours.
I was induced around 2 o'clock. They started the Pitocin, and it helps stimulate contractions. Started the Pitocin.
Here we go.
Here we go. Now we wait.
All right, I'm going to go to the spa, and I'll be back.
They start at a very low dosage and slowly work it up. So I really didn't feel anything. I was having contractions supposedly, but they were not uncomfortable. And they did that for 4 hours because I'm GBS positive, so I have to get 4 hours of penicillin. So I was, I guess, technically like the induction had started, but I wasn't feeling anything. I started out at 3 centimeters dilated. 4 hours later, I was still 3 centimeters dilated. So maybe a little more effaced, but it just hadn't done anything. So then my midwife's name was Elka. She came in, she was like, okay, we can break your water if you want to speed things along. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds great. Just so you know, in my past labors, like my water has broken and I've given birth very shortly thereafter. With Fritz and Lark, I was also induced. They broke my water and I, gave birth maybe an hour or two later. And with Win, my water broke like right before he was born, which is a whole other funny story.
Like all also like when you were like, once I'm induced, like I have my babies very quickly, and they were like, okay, and then it was like, hello.
I said it. I told you. I did not hide the ball. I was like, this is how it's gonna go. You're gonna break my water, and then it's gonna be shocking how quickly this baby comes. This is my 3rd time doing this. And it was like, oh yeah, okay. Well, and then like that midwife was leaving, and she was like, the next midwife was on for the next 12 hours. Like she had just broken my water and she was leaving. And she was like, yeah, so I bet the next midwife might be here when you have your baby. And I was like, no, actually it's gonna be much faster. And so Elka broke my water, which I had never heard this before, but then my friend I was talking to yesterday, like had the exact same thing said to her, that like our bag of waters was like really hard to break. It had like a double layer or something. I don't know. So she had to like put a lot of effort into breaking my water. Very weird sensation. And then you are essentially just like leaking fluid. Then by like 7:55, I had my first like, oh, this is a legit contraction.
Because you didn't have the epidural, right?
I didn't have the epidural. I've now twice given birth without an epidural accidentally. Like not my birth plan. I don't know, man. People make these elaborate birth plans. My birth plan was like, get an epidural. And I still didn't do it.
All that time. You were there for all that time.
All that time. They could have had me all. I had the thing in my arm. I was ready, but. So my nurse, who I loved, her name was Jess. She was fabulous. The nurse was like setting up the room for the anesthesiologist to come in. She was like, here's these chairs, go here. And then she like looked at me sitting there on the bed and was like, should I get a midwife first? Because I really felt like, I was like, oh, this is happening. Like, these are really intense. And she was like, oh yeah, they could check you. They don't normally check you this soon, but they could check and just see like where you're at. And I could barely speak at this point. I guess she saw it in my face, or I nodded. So she called the midwife, and the midwife didn't answer. And so then Jess left the room to go find someone. I think I like nodded at her, but in my head, I thought, I was like, yes, absolutely. I need someone to come and check me right now. Ted was like, no, Christy, you didn't talk for like the last 5 minutes there. Like you were not talking. Like you were in some sort of like state. So it's just me and Ted in the room, and like suddenly I am giving birth. Like I needed to push, like my body. I was not proactively pushing, but it was like just happening. And so I had Holland's head like in my hand. So Ted sees this happening, goes out into the hall, and in a tone that our nurse later described as appropriately urgent said, we need someone in the room now. And he came back in the room. He like catches Holland's bum, and then by the time her legs were coming out, like the entire labor and delivery floor had like run into our room. They got me up. I was kind of like crouching. They got me up onto the bed, which was a great start. And, you know, immediately Holland is like yelling, like great crying right from the start. I still can't really believe it happened like that. And so I was only, you know, having contractions for about an hour, a little bit more, that were like legit and really, really quite intense at the end. And the other thing I had wanted to do was delayed cord clamping to just let the last bit of nutrients and good things from mom like flow to baby before you cut the cord. And so they were going to go to cut the cord, and Ted, remembering that this was important to me, was like, oh wait, we want to make sure to do delayed cord clamping. And the nurse was kind of like, yeah, it's been like 3 to 5 minutes because of the way that things went down, so like we're definitely okay to cut the cord. So we got that part. You know, I did get to do skin to skin with Holland right away, and she nursed right away, so all of that was good. One of my friends was like, that is a good grand finale to your birth experiences, and I was like, yes. Did not expect to have a more chaotic time than I did with Wynn. Okay, so after Holland was born, I was nursing her. I had to get a couple of stitches for a first-degree tear. My lovely nurse, Jess, she made sure I was numbed. She got me painkillers quickly. She was right by my side as all of this was happening. She knew how afraid I was of pain post-birth, because that was like the really strong memory with Wynn, that had been so painful for me. I had a doctor who was not so careful. And then we were taken to a shared recovery room. And that was when things took a turn from exciting, if chaotic, to scary. I noticed I was bleeding very, very heavily. With what happened, you know, an hour after she was born, when I started hemorrhaging and had to have a lot of interventions that were not comfortable to try to get that bleeding to stop. Jumping in here, as this was me just after giving birth, when I couldn't really yet talk about what specifically had happened. So here's what they had to do. First, nurses tried a catheter to see if emptying my bladder would stop the bleeding. That did not work. They then needed to try to manually clear the blood clots from my uterus to try to get it to contract to stop bleeding. And that is exactly what it sounds like. I had 2 different doctors stick their hands up into my uterus to try to pull out the blood clots while they restarted my contractions with Pitocin. They gave me additional medications via IV. They were massaging my uterus from the outside. At this point, I did have morphine for the pain, but it was still very painful, and it was just so much force. I couldn't stop crying, and I was trying to convince my brain that this is what should be happening, that I was being taken care of, because my body just felt like it should be fighting back, like this shouldn't be happening. We need to get away. We need to fight. And I was just trying to convince myself that everything was okay. Meanwhile, Ted was in the room with Holland, and there was another family right on the other side of the curtain, and my mind was also on them as I was thinking about them hearing all of this happening, you know, right on the other side of the curtain. So eventually they were able to stop the bleeding. My amazing nurses cleaned me up, changed the sheets on the bed without getting me out, and then they had to count and collect all of the blood clots kind of for, I guess they kept a record of that, like how big they were. So they were collecting blood clots, like cleaned me all up, and then we were just back, me and Ted, with the baby. I'm going to drop us back in to me talking about the hemorrhage a few days after it happened, and then a few hours after it happened when I was still in the hospital. I didn't end up having to do surgery. I didn't have to get a blood transfusion. It was very uncomfortable and felt very invasive. When I first started bleeding, my brain just was like, I'm going to die. Like, there was no reason. My life was not in danger. They knew what they were doing. They could fix it. But that's just what my brain did when I was like bleeding suddenly really heavily. I feel like both of those 2 things, the labor and delivery and the postpartum hemorrhage, were kind of like one event in my mind. And as I've been able to process it, I'm able to separate those 2 things out in a way that is really helpful. As I get a little bit further away, I'm kind of more like, oh, wow, like, I can't believe I did that. So just trying to take a deep breath after a crazy 24, 36 hours and Baby is finally getting a bath. I guess she's like 21 hours old, which is so crazy that she's only been here for that long. I think last night was like the longest night ever. And she's so big. She's 8 pounds, 12 ounces. We just got our own room. Ted is getting us Chinese food, and I'm excited to see what Baby looks like without so much schmutz all over herself. Yeah, she's a champ. As I continued to process what had happened, a visit by a hospital pediatrician caused me to start thinking about a truth I really want to dive into and make space for in this season of the podcast. So there was just a male pediatrician who stopped by to say that he had seen the baby when she was getting her bath and she looked great. And he said, "Oh, I heard your birth story. You have a great story. It's like such a good story because the baby is fine." And I was like, I am incredibly lucky that the baby is healthy, of course, but I think it's really invalidating of what it feels like to have something super unexpected happen in your birth. And like, even if the outcome is fine, there should still be space for understanding that that's a lot to process. And like, the goal can't be just a healthy baby. You also want the birthing person to feel like they were supported and like that was a good experience too. And I think there can be space for both of those conversations. And I don't know that he was really on board. So then he just went back to talking about how the new baby has a rash, but I shouldn't be concerned about it. So, we stuck to safe topics of conversation, and I don't know that I changed any hearts or minds in that conversation. There just has to be more space for us as new moms and birthing people to talk about the full range of our feelings, our joy and trauma and everything in between, and to be supported.
I keep hearing about like, whoa, your birth story was crazy, instead of being like, I'm so sorry we just like let you down. So sorry none of us were around.
No, I'm so sorry you were. I know. Well, isn't it so much also, it's also like acknowledgement. If somebody would just be like, people go through all sorts of things, and sometimes but it means so much when someone will just be like, oh wow, yeah, that must have been a lot. Just like that acknowledgement instead of just dismissing you. But there's just so much dismissal, I feel like, during pregnancy and postpartum of like symptoms, like everything's just quote unquote normal. It's like, okay, it might be normal, but how can we help you to feel better during this time? There must be some things we could talk about that could help you to feel more comfortable and more empowered and more like it's a partnership as you're going through this with your healthcare providers. Maybe especially as women, we're so conditioned to like, you don't want to be complaining. And it is this message of like, the healthy baby is all that matters. And by having that be the message, it immediately makes me, and I know a lot of other women, you feel like you shouldn't speak up at all for yourself because then you seem somehow ungrateful. But there has to be a way to bring moms and parents and or birthing people, I guess is like the more inclusive term, which I love, but have our health be valued too, and our mental health. And if it's like, well, there's a healthy baby, full stop, that's really delegitimizing of like all of these experiences that we go through in this process. I want to add something here that I didn't say in my conversation with Zach, which is that the focus on a healthy baby is also very problematic for parents whose baby does have an illness or a disability, because it makes it seem as though a healthy baby is the only good outcome, the only valued outcome, and there should be space for joy and discussion around that topic too. I felt a lot of shame when my twins were in the NICU, in part because I felt I'd done something wrong and that they weren't, quote, healthy. And I know other parents have felt similar things, whether their babies had short or longer term challenges and differences. So I wanted to flag that problem here too. So that is my birth story with Holland, and it's the starting point for the season, where I'll be sharing my stories, raising questions, and trying to create a space where we can talk about all the feelings of the fourth trimester in a way that is messy and complicated and joyful. I'd love to hear from you because I want this to be a conversation. Send me an email at cpo@highcolugo.com. That's CPO as in Chief Parent Officer. Next week, we'll be talking about the first week. When do you want to wake up the new baby?
Yeah.
What's her name?
New baby sister.
I know, but what's her name? Like your name?
Holland.
Holland, that's right. You know. All this and more on the next Today We Tried. Oh, great. I lost one ear in the course of my delivering my own child, and then the recovery and everything. One AirPod went missing. So it turns out you're able to order just one AirPod. And if you have Apple Care. You still have to pay for it. And you still have to pay for it. But other than that, Today We Tried is brought to you by Colugo, a baby gear brand founded by parents for parents. I'm your host, Christy McGregor, and our incomparable producer is Zach Walker. Come back next week for more tales from the fourth trimester. And in the meantime, remember, you got this.